So that is a starting point. So you may know. This was discussed in New York, Law of the Sea Convention Office, the special UN office coordinated to develop this United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. But this is not for the management law. This is not for the law for the fisheries management. It's more ocean governance. And the main people's concern was more territory, not so much fisheries issues. In this law, the internationally they discuss about what is territorial water, and also this was the first time they discuss about EEZ, main concern. Of course, management responsibility is already given. And maybe turning point is this meeting. 1984, 2 years after the local conventions, the FAO organized a conference on fisheries management and development. Would like to use management and development. But I think gradual is more management. But still in those days, people still like to discuss maximum sustainable yield. Since when I was in the FAO, I was always attacking the MSY. This is not the appropriate methodology. So,
management or limitation of catch and effort. That is, we have that already. Basically, that's management. That maximum output from the resources in a sustainable manner. That is somewhere here again. That's a nice one also. Maybe it goes into the same direction like you, work pressure. Work pressure. Like work pressure, I don't know who wrote this. Why does it cause pressure on you, not on the resources?
Because it's in our, as you know, even I do not know the concept of.
Okay. Only the higher you get, the less pressure is.
Yeah.
MSY reminds me of sustainable fisheries management. This is, I wouldn't say I was hoping for a card like this. This is management. In 2002, in which are all the countries here signatories of that? I think you all participated. It's not really binding, but if I look at national policies, everybody now says we will meet the Millennium Goals. I think all the countries here have that in their national whatever policy statements. And one of those, since the SEAFDEC Millennium Conference, we in SEAFDEC are saying MSY is not a good concept. And we had a project, an indicator project, where we tried to come up with alternatives. I think it was NFIMB and you were involved in that, the indicator project?
One of the officers.
Okay. Doesn't matter, but we tried to come up with alternatives. And then half a year or a year later, everybody signs the statement as a basic policy guiding principle. It's a contradiction somehow. One basic thought which came to my mind when I heard MSY. All models are wrong, kind of. Or whatever mathematical models you have to describe nature, most of them or many of them are wrong. As a non-fisheries biologist, I think we need something like MSY. I'm a social scientist. All of you who were in my earlier lectures here and training courses where I taught a little bit, I was saying the same thing. As a manager who is not a fisheries biologist, who focuses more on people, and everybody now says we have to focus on people, not on fish. We have to manage the people, not the fish. The center of our attention should be people. But then I say, what about the fish?
The fishing effort.
Yes, that's one E, but E is the effort.
Yeah.
How would you?
Some sort of quotient for quotient for the fishing effort, because usually the gear you uses has some catchability coefficient, because it has some escapement factor or something.
Escapement factor, I think, is one of the things here. It's the efficiency, fishing effort, but with that effort you don't take out 100% of your target species. You take out only a portion of target species. And that portion is catchability. That is my understanding, but I'm not sure whether
Something
something
close to that.
like that. Something
It's
like
a
that.
factor.
Theory of sustainable fishing. It's like your bank account. You get interest rate. You can always take out the sustainable yield, which you can maintain over time. At this level here, the sustainable yield is only this much, because not much fish is produced. You don't use it.
Not finished reading.
Not finished reading. It's not an easy read for the
work inside.
Yes, I think that's something we should keep in mind. Lots of statistics. Just remember that for later today. But you have the ready-made software.
Put in the figure.
Yeah, you just put in the figures. That's the problem.
The part two is also the exercises.
Yes.
Part of that is exercises.
Yeah.
So step by step you do.
The problem you have to go, I call it data for what is it, ground truthing, forever, whatsoever.
Data collection, I
Data
think,
collection.
is another very important thing. Just keep it in mind when we talk about it. It's really, really nice, detailed, and it's downloadable on the FIO Fisheries webpage. And why is FIO doing this when nobody is using it? Only in trainings. I will be in Cambodia on between 19th and 23rd of November for FIO.
No, I'm not late. I just want to accept my money.
But I have it somewhere on my hard drive. If you have a
Hindi ko nga alam bakit 99 yung ano ko sa Ocean SEAFDEC. Tsaka hindi poly lang yun.
so many files shown.
Well, during this afternoon's session, the participants were introduced to the fisheries refugia concept that's been developed over the past 3 to 4 years by the South China Sea Project's Regional Working Group on Fisheries. The main topics that we covered, we looked at some of the problems associated with fisheries habitat management, in that there's certainly a very important need at the regional level to improve how fish stocks and critical habitat linkages are managed. We discussed during the session that there have been a number of initiatives promoted over recent decades, including the large marine ecosystem concept, marine protected areas. But most of the participants agreed that these haven't really resulted in any significant outcomes in terms of fish habitat management in the South China Sea and the Gulf of Thailand. The main topic we looked at was the refugia concept and how that can be used to improve fisheries habitat management, as well as the similarities and differences between the refugia concept and marine protected areas.
Philippines is Mr. Noel Baru. Thailand is Mr. Chana Saiklihan. And Vietnam is Dr. Dao Mun Sen. And our regional experts is Mr. Somsak, who was here on Monday. We have another regional expert from the Philippines called Professor Nigel Armada. We have myself. And usually Dr. Kato comes to the meeting, does Magnus from SEAFDEC project. So we usually have about 10 people in our regional working group on fisheries. And we're over the last two years, we've looked at the refugia concept and looked at it very closely in relation to fisheries refugia sites. Where possible, we should try to maximise the benefit. If you develop any management area, what we're saying is that management area has to maximise the benefits to the communities where possible and minimise the cost to fishing communities in terms of trying to maximise the benefit to cost ratio. What's been experienced with other, primarily to manage habitat for biodiversity conservation. The costs to fishing communities have been large. Fishers have been prevented from fishing in certain areas. That has increased their costs of fishing. Either they have to travel further distances to new fishing grounds, or they can't fish anymore if they don't have sufficient sized vessels with sufficient engine capacities and large enough to go offshore. So there's other management initiatives have had quite substantial costs to fishing communities. The South China Sea Project is minimise those costs associated with area-based approaches to marine resource management. We're trying to also maximise the benefits. So if you look at any coastal, or the coastline, maybe this is down around the Thailand coast, Cambodia, down into Vietnam, up the coast of Vietnam. Somewhere around here we might have Phu Quoc Island. Up in Thailand we might have something like Got Chum Island. Along this part of the coastline to the life cycle of important species. Where they are, we have a general idea where they are. But when we establish any management, what we want to try to make sure is that the management area that we establish are on those sites that are critical. So we might have somewhere here It might be a critical nursery area, which might be a critical spawning area for species like the Indo-Pacific mackerel, the Refugia brachyzoma, the short Phu Quoc Island in Vietnam here. It's a very important seagrass areas along the Cambodian coast at Kampot province. Along any coastline there will be sites that are critical to the life, or of critical importance to the life cycle of species. Okay? That's the reason why we're doing this, is to try to maximize the benefits in terms of fish stocks. We're more likely to establish management areas that will result in benefits in terms of the health of fish stocks. Establishing management areas that aren't based on critical. In the Philippines, for instance, the establishment of fish sanctuaries, the criteria that were mainly used for a uniqueness, biodiversity, representativeness. Did it represent a certain habitat type? These were criteria that related to biodiversity conservation, not fisheries management. So what's biodiversity conservation, not fisheries? So the end result is that you end up with management areas that don't align, may very well contribute to improved management of habitats. Okay? It may lead to the reduction in the rate of loss of habitat, sure. But in terms of areas that are of critical importance to life cycles, will result in better benefits than these. If you have limited resources for the establishment of management areas, you want to make sure that you're directing the resources to the management of sites that are going to lead to the greatest benefits. And that's what the fisheries refugia concept is really all about. It's trying to maximise benefits for fisheries whilst minimising the costs to the fishing communities. This is the example of, I use the example of the Philippines with the fish sanctuaries. Criteria that related to biodiversity conservation rather than fish stocks. He's a regional coral reef expert. He's done a lot of work on the Vietnamese coast, right from the north up near China, right around to Cambodia. He's dived in most sites. Refugia areas should be. And we looked at the problems of both growth overfishing and the spawning refugia. Potentially the priority refugia that should be managed in terms of dealing with the problems of growth and recruitment overfishing. So this is just a sketch which I put in. We're focusing on identifying critical inshore nursery refugia for fish stocks of transboundary significance, and also the spawning refugia. Very good support from local fishing communities. Now, we have identified a total of, I think, 49 critical spawning and critical nursery refugia, which I think would help. We have a map that shows all of the sites that we've identified. Page 9, figure 2. So, species. It also shows the initial sites selected for inclusion in a regional system of fisheries refugia and sites of high priority for. When I overlay this map with a map of existing marine protected areas, none of them overlap, except one in Vietnam. There hasn't been a lot of consideration of fisheries in the establishment of marine protected areas. Personally, I have for conserving, very sensitive habitats. If we have a very sensitive habitat that we shouldn't allow any use of, maybe, it might be a site that's important for any. Is that fisheries considerations haven't been considered or given much thought during the site selection process. Province up in the north of the Philippines on the South China Sea coast. Here's June here, I believe. There's area here, right? I think I can see. Right. This is the mayor of Masinloc, Mr. Eudoro. Am I correct? And our fisheries focal point from Philippines, Mr. Noel Peru. The one on your right is a consultation that was done in Thailand in relation to the Indo-Pacific Mackerel Management Area that you will visit tomorrow in the next several days, I think. Tong Island in Indonesia. Very, very remote part of the world. But we all went there and we sat down with all of the national reports on coral reefs, seagrass, wetlands, mangroves that were developed through the South China Sea project, and a whole heap of other. There's one option, focus on fish life cycle and habitat linkages. And the final one is potential problems. Now what I would like to do is just go through these as a group and try to identify, see if we can remember, what some of the objectives are. It will be a good basis for a comparison between the two types of management areas. Objectives 1 is, okay, Boy has said increased biomass. Yeah? Is used in the development of MPA systems.
Object of MPA is conservation of biodiversity.
Right. Was just going to say that. Endangered species conservation. Romy. Objectives for MPAs.
That is improvement of the loss of habitats or recovery of
Oh, okay.
habitat loss.
Maybe rehabilitation of degraded habitats.
Can you eat that? You need binoculars?
All right. Habitat protection. Right. I think it's covered there in the... Going to be the priority objectives in this situation. We have biodiversity conservation, endangered species, rehabilitation of degraded habitats. Do you think fisheries is going to be at the top of the list? No. More often than not, fisheries is a secondary consideration.
It depends which department manage the NPA.
Right.
If the NPA managed by fisheries authority, maybe the top priority is fisheries, more environment.
Right.
I think so. I don't know about because I'm for fisheries.
Right. To protect the critical life cycle. I think it would be to
That's definition.
between fish stocks and fishing. The, right. So one of the objectives you'll remember is to reduce the impacts of recruitment overfishing, and then to minimise the effects of destructive fishing gear. It's the uniqueness, things like the unique, and also representativeness. And what else is there? What are the criteria for selecting refugia?
Marine park then is a non-take zone.
Right.
But if we gazette it as fishing prohibited area, I mean certain, especially the traditional gears, what we call it,
Right.
can do fishing.
What I said was that MPAs are good, but no, not MPAs. MPAs are there only if the donor organisation is still there. As soon as the donor finishes the work, or a project finishes, often what happens is that the MPA is shut down, or the effectiveness of the site diminishes because there's no well-established management systems in place for them. This has been the experience, I think, in the Philippines. Is that right?
Nobody's not have to pay for the volunteers to
Right.
secure the area.
Yes. I guess it means it's a high foundation established an MPA there about 20 years ago. Just recently we